Hello, welcome. If you're watching this video, it means that you are going to be joining me for an online workshop. This video is to give you a breakdown of the basics that I will be using in my demonstration. You don't necessarily need to have all of these things, but these are all the things that I will be using in my demonstration. If you want to replicate the same results, then having these things will be of greatest benefit to you to get the most out of the process. So the first thing that I'm going to be using is my favorite tool, palette knives. So palette knives come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes. You don't have to spend a great deal on palette knives. You can get a pack of like 5 or 6 from places like the Warehouse or Warehouse Stationery, Kmart, even your local $2 shops. I prefer to use metal knives, but you can get plastic. The reason that I prefer metal is because they have more of a consistent edge. So if you're using plastic materials, sometimes they can be a little bit rough. So these are my favorite tools for applying paint. However, you can also use brushes. So you will notice that I will be predominantly using knives in my demonstration. So brushes come in all different shapes and sizes. Again, I don't spend a lot on brushes simply because I notoriously do not look after them. So it's not unusual for me to get caught up in the process and leave brushes in paint water, or leave brushes filled with paint and then forget about them and leave them to dry, which that can make them quite difficult to salvage. There's no hard and fast rules in terms of what you can use. I typically, at least in the initial process of creating the first layers of a painting, will use knives and only knives. But brushes are a good thing to have and to practice with, especially if you enjoy doing finer detail. So you've got knives and brushes. Then what I would suggest is you can use watercolor paper. However, it can feel like a lot of pressure to produce something amazing when you spend or make the investment in more expensive paper. This is my little tip. These pads of paper you can get from Kmart. I believe that they're $3 or $4. They're in the kids section. They're not specifically like meant for painting, but what I found is that the weight of the paper in these pads is brilliant for doing warm-ups and just having play around without any pressure, of wasting any materials. That's something that comes up for me a lot when it comes to just diving into practice, is not wanting to waste anything. So I'm conscious of the fact that how much you invest in this process can affect the way that you approach letting loose and just really creating without hesitating because you wanting to get it right, or you wanting to have a masterpiece out of every paper that you begin with. So these are 144 pages, these pads. They have several different covers on them. This is the one that I have currently, and a heavier paperweight, so I use that a lot. I often will cut them in half or quarters if I'm doing colour studies, those sorts of things. So you can use watercolour paper, but this is what I would be using for the warm-up part of the process. And then I will demonstrate a final product on canvas. So the paint is going to behave differently on each surface. So in order to simplify the process, rather than going through getting you to tape up boards with paper and that sort of thing, I have opted to go for canvas. Once we've been through the warm-up, I'll be working with canvas. Now this is good quality stretched canvas. As you can see, it's from Gordon Harris. However, because you're just starting out, it may be less pressure and more accessible for you if you buy cheaper canvas, which yes, there is a difference in quality, but right now what you want to be focusing on is really just getting into the flow and having a go. So not spending a whole lot of money on materials that are going to make you hesitant and not want to mess up, because the whole idea of this process is just to allow whatever comes. So this is professional quality canvas, but you can go on to Kmart, for example. So those are the surfaces that I'll be using in the demonstration. And as for paint, you can buy and use whatever paint you choose. I use Atelier because it is good quality paint, as well as being more cost effective than some of the other brands that are easily accessible to me. But I like this brand because it is accessible virtually everywhere I go to buy materials. And yeah, so you want to have either, you can have your 3 closest to primary colors, or you can choose colors that you're drawn to, whatever works for you. But you want to have, say, 3 colors and white. So you're always going to use a lot more white typically in the process, because of the fact that it allows you to create variation in your colors. So we'll go through this in the demonstration, and I'll explain what I'm doing and why. But essentially you want to have white and 3 colors. And I would encourage you to go closest to primary so that you have the ability to mix a broader spectrum of colours. With paint, you need to be mindful of what the paint is made of. So there are paints that are made with materials that are toxic. So for example, cadmium yellow contains cadmium, which is toxic to your body. So you want to be really mindful of protecting yourself where necessary. I tend to steer away from anything that has a toxic component in terms of acrylics, simply because I don't want to be worrying about, you know, having to have gloves and those sorts of things, because I personally prefer to have the tactile experience without, you know, a barrier between my hands and the work. So those are heavy body acrylics, and I will show you how to create different effects with them. So that's what I would encourage. The other thing that I will be using, you don't have to have, but I will be using, is fluid acrylic. So this is by Golden. I think Matisse also do a fluid acrylic. You don't have to have this. You can, if you want to create the same spattering effect that you see in a lot of my work, you can just water down heavy body if you prefer. But I prefer to use fluid acrylic because of the opacity that it maintains when it's still runny. So if you water down heavy body acrylic, it's going to become more translucent, whereas a fluid acrylic is runny while still maintaining opacity. So that's something that I will be using. You don't necessarily have to have it, but it is going to be part of the demonstration. And also, this is not an essential, but this is something that I will be using. This is an alcohol ink. This is Pinata Rich Gold. You can buy it in much smaller bottles. This is just, I buy it in a large quantity because I use it in everything I create. So I will show you how I use this, how I apply it to acrylics. Typically alcohol inks and acrylics don't play nice, but I use the gold as an embellishment at the end. So you do not have to have this, but if you want the gold sparkle, this is what I use. In terms of tools, you want to have spray bottle of water. This is pretty essential to the process, just because of how I paint. So yeah, you want to have a spray bottle to be able to apply water to your surface while you're painting. You're going to want to have things like jars, for water for washing your brushes, and you're going to want to have things like paper towels. So I feel like that is a good sort of rundown of the essential things that I'll be using in my demonstration. There are screeds of other things that you could be using, but this is just to give you a general overview so that you know what I'll be using, and to give you a heads up in terms of if you are going to paint alongside me, which is, I'm hoping that's what's going to be happening. But otherwise, I will see you in the demo.